This is a Aninja Sapaya Sutta, suitable for the imperturbable. Majjhima Nikaya 106. Thus have I heard. On one occasion the Buddha was living among the Kurus, in a town of the Kurus called Kamasa. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, yes Bhante, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this: Bhikkhus, sense desires are impermanent, empty, false, deceptive. That which is fraudulent, bhikkhus, is the utterance of a fool. Bhikkhus, whatever sense desires here and now, and whatever sense desires in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense desires here and now, and whatever perceptions of sense desires in lives to come, both of these are Mara's realm, Mara's province, Mara's bait, Mara's feeding ground. So the thing to note here is that whatever sense desires here and now, and whatever sense desires in lives to come, means whatever sense desires are present, and whatever possibilities of sense desires are also present, right here, right now, as possibilities. That's the important thing to discern. Because seeing, for example, an arisen sensual desire, right here, right now, and overcoming it on that basis, through thinking about non-attractive or how dangerous it is and so on, that's all fine. But what one person also needs to see is the simultaneously present possibilities of sensuality for the future. So you might deal with a particular arising of sensual desire, but you also want to deal with what's peripheral to that particular arising, which is possibilities for more arising, not now, later. So even if you overcome a particular sensual desire that has arisen, you want to, you don't want to rest, so to speak, in that overcoming, but you want to see that the possibilities of these things being manifested again tomorrow, in next day, and in 2 years, in 10 years, in 10 lifetimes. You want to see that that's still present, and above all, it's still applicable to you. So that's why the one who reflects rightly needs to include it in the reflection that not just the present sensuality, it's impermanent, empty, false, deceptive, it should be unwanted, but also that liability to future sensuality as well should be seen the same. That's how you truly surmount the entire domain, not just the particular manifestation of it. It says further, here these evil, unwholesome things lead to mental covetousness, ill will, and anger. They create an obstacle for a noble disciple in training here. So, they create an obstacle for somebody who has the right view, at least. And yes, that's it said in other suttas as well. A noble disciple, sotapanna or higher, could be, it's not a guarantee, but it could be distracted still with sensuality, with sense desires, by not fully dwelling on the danger of it. So it says, in this case, a bhikkhu, a noble disciple, reflects thus: whatever sense desire here and now, whatever sense desires in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense desires here and now, whatever perceptions of sense desires in lives to come. And again, this is if anybody wonders whether it means as a possibility future, it does, because how could you be perceiving sense desires in lives to come when those lives aren't there? And that's the whole point. You don't want to wait for every manifestation of sensuality to arise and affect you. You want to see it on the level of possibility. And that is the peripheral level in regard to the actually, currently, particularly present sensuality and sensual domain. So whatever perceptions of these possibilities you have, as in whatever perceptions of sense desires in lives to come, you want to see that as well as pertaining to the perceptions of sensuality here and now. It says both of these things are Mara's realm, Mara's province, Mara's bait, Mara's feeding ground. Here, these evil, unwholesome things lead to mental covetousness, ill will, and anger. They create an obstacle for a noble disciple in training here. What if I were to dwell with a mind that is large, expanded, having mentally determined to surmount the world? And again, this is not a... we spoke about this before in the few talks on meditation and how to establish your mind. But that's exactly what this is. Expanded mind, so to speak, means mind that has overcome through including the discernment of both particular sensuality and the domain of the peripherally possible sensual experience. So without a particular manifestation. And that's how you go truly beyond the entire domain of sensuality, as I just said. So the mind then gets expanded beyond it, so to speak, large, having mentally determined to surmount the world, which is what sensuality is for somebody who is still bound with sensual desire. So surmounting, expanding, establishing your mind above it, enlarging it, whatever word you use, that's the point. Not just overcoming one particular perception of sensuality that's currently arisen and enduring for you, but you want to start discerning possibilities of being affected by sensuality in the future. That also partakes in the domain of particularly present enduring sensuality for you. So in the same manner then, when there is no particular manifestation of some sensual desire, you could review your mind and see, okay, so maybe there is no particular manifestation of sensuality that's bothering me now, but would that be true for the future? Will in the future, when the sensual objects manifest themselves, will I also remain unbothered by it? If the answer is no, means the mind hasn't been enlarged, expanded, and mentally determined to surmount the world. So for somebody with the right view, they realize they only need to do is maintain the establishment of the mind on that expanded level. Expanded is a relative sense, of course, but expanded in a sense of surmounting and having included both particular sensuality and possibilities of sensualities in the lives to come, included, and just don't descend down on that level. Because dwelling with the mind that is large, expanded, having mentally determined to surmount the world, there will be none of this evil, unwholesome mental covetousness, ill will, and anger. Because mental covetousness, ill will, and anger need the sensual domain as its basis. Having surmounted the entire sensual domain correctly, which means you're not contacted by it, then ill will, covetousness, and anger cannot affect you either. They cannot manifest. Having abandoned these, the Noble Disciple reflects further, my mind will be unlimited, unbounded, and well developed. That's exactly what we just described. Large, expanded, and so on means unlimited by sensuality, unbounded, uncontrolled, not liable to it, well developed. Having practiced this way, having often dwelled like this, his mind develops clarity in this domain. And that's another thing. So the mind gets established upon these right type of thoughts of the sensual domain correctly, not misconceiving it, not ignoring it, not seeing it. Thoughts of liability to future sensuality. So when the mind is properly established, then the monk dwells in that state. As in, it's not a meditative experience where he's frozen into. It means the mind has reflected correctly, surmounted things that need to be surmounted, keeps a watchful eye on greed, aversion, delusion to not manifest, because that would mean he has gone back into that domain where these things manifest. So he goes around his day dwelling in this state. That's exactly what it means, having often dwelled like this. So he spends time in it. His minds develop clarity in this domain. With clarity, either he enters upon the imperturbable now, or he inclines towards it with understanding. Again, clarity of what imperturbable is, understanding of what imperturbable is. That's how he enters it. That's how he develops it. Imperturbable means imperturbable by sensuality. Means the possibility of sensual domain cannot distract one anymore, because he dwelled long enough away from it. And it says, on the breakup of the body after death, it is possible that consciousness that has been involved with this will reach the imperturbable. That means that consciousness that has been involved with this means he's been making these phenomena endure presently for him. As in, somebody can just think about imperturbable. That's one thing. But another thing is to think rightly about the imperturbable domain, develop understanding, and then dwell in it. By dwelling in it, that domain is present for you. Whenever there is presence, that's what consciousness is. So through often dwelling in such a phenomenon of the imperturbable domain that has surmounted sensuality, his consciousness has been involved with this sufficiently. And because of that, in the moment, well, after death, it could reach the imperturbable. So that's the first way suitable for the imperturbable. The second way is, noble disciple reflects thus: whatever sense desires here and now, whatever sense desires in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense desires here and now, whatever perceptions of sense desires in lives to come, whatever matter, all matter is the four great elements, and from the four great elements matter is assumed, matter is held up, matter is misconceived or conceived, just it. So when he practices in this way, having often dwelt like this, his mind develops clarity in this domain. With clarity he enters upon the imperturbable, or he inclines towards it with understanding. On the breakup of the body after death, it is possible that the consciousness involved with this will reach the imperturbable. This is the second way. So here, one might wonder, why does Buddha talk about sensuality, sensual desires in lives to come, and then all matter is the four great elements, and from the four great elements matter is assumed. Where's the connection there? Well, the connection there is, can you even think about any central object of any sense if there is no an actual, factual, material presence, existence of that thing? If there is no matter to be assumed, how can there be attraction to a material form of any kind? How can there be lust towards it? So in the heart of any and every sensuality here and now, in the heart of every possibility of sensuality for the lives to come, one thing that's universally in common is that independence of four great elements, the independence of material aspect, which means anything sensual, any sensual object is completely circumstantial, accidental, you could even say. Not that your sensuality and your sensual preferences and proliferation is accidental, but the material aspect of every sensual object could have not been. Literally. It is, but it could have not been. And that's the whole point. Four great elements, as in they're so great you can't even appropriate them, let alone have them and regard them as yours and have them obey your will and so on. So, and that's in, like, even if you possess the sensual object in its heart, the materiality of the sensual object is something utterly inaccessible to you. And you can apply the same to your own body, to the body of others, to the sense objects, to your own senses. It's utterly enclosed. So the entire sensual domain is utterly enclosed within the material domain. And as such, it's inaccessible. It's just, you cannot even conceive how to come underneath, so to speak, and truly own it. So you can only entertain the notion of ownership through gratuitously taking for granted the offered careless pleasure in regard to it, the pleasure, the distraction that you get through the satisfying that possibility of pleasure on that surface, but that cannot pick up that whole sensual domain and make it yours, despite what the sensuality tells you. That's why the Buddha says it's a fraud. It deceives you. It's a bait. You jump on it thinking, I'll have this, failing to see that it contains a hook that actually hooks you up and baits you like a fish. Then it says, furthermore, because a noble disciple reflects thus: whatever sense desires here and now, whatever sense desires in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense desires here and now, whatever perceptions of sense desires in lives to come, whatever matter here and now, whatever matter in lives to come, whatever perception of matter here and now, whatever perception of matter in lives to come, both of these are impermanent. Whatever is impermanent, it's not worth delighting in, not worth welcoming, not worth becoming attached to. So this is just the same extension of the same thing we just discussed in the previous one when you were assuming matter. Four great elements, you take that whole fundamental domain that determines the sensuality, in which sense matter here acts as sankhara. But if somebody fails to see it on that level, you take that aspect, matter being the sankhara of your sensuality, being a determination, being the inseparable from. Sensuality is inseparable from material, as we just said. So what is the main characteristic of determinations in general? What is the universal property of them? The property is, it cannot be owned. Determinations have arisen on their own. That's what anicca is. The property is, it's impermanent. It's subject, well, you can't even conceive it. Like, how could you decide what it's subjected to? You're invisible to it. The determinations, the structural determinations, the presence of matter and so on, they don't see you. You don't exist for it. So whatever perceptions of matter here and now, whatever perceptions of matter in lives to come, so it's the same principle as it is with the sensuality. Not just the presently arisen sensuality that's inseparable from the matter, but also the possibility of matter through the possibility of future sensualities. So whatever perceptions of matter here and now, whatever perceptions of matter in lives to come, both of these are impermanent. So as we said, it's that impossibility to own of the matter that is inseparable from sensuality. Whatever cannot be owned, whatever has arisen on its own, whatever it's virtually accidental and circumstantial, that is not worth delighting in, it's not worth appropriating it, it's not worth welcoming it, it's not worth becoming attached to. When he practices in this way, having often dwelt like this, his mind develops clarity in this domain. With the clarity, he enters upon the imperturbable now, or he inclines towards it with understanding. On the breakup of the body after death, it is possible that the consciousness involved with this will reach the imperturbable. This because is declared to be the third way which is suitable for the imperturbable. Furthermore, because a noble disciple reflects thus: whatever sense desires here and now, whatever sense desires in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense desires here and now, whatever perceptions of sense desires in lives to come, whatever matter here and now, whatever matter in lives to come, whatever perceptions of matter here and now, and whatever perceptions of matter in lives to come, and whatever perceptions of imperturbability, all are perceptions. Wherever these cease without a reminder, this is peaceful, this is sublime, the domain of nothingness. For one who practices in this way, he is one who often dwells like this. His mind develops clarity in this domain, and so on. With the clarity, he enters upon the domain of nothingness, and he inclines towards understanding. Breakup after death, it's possible that consciousness is involved with this will reach the domain of nothingness. So the perceptions of sense desires, the perceptions of possibilities of sense desire, the perceptions of the matter that determines the perceptions of the sense desires, the perception of the matter that determines the possibilities of sense desires, the perception of imperturbable as in the perception of the surmounted domain of all of this, all these are perceptions. Wherever these perceptions cease without reminder, which is the nothingness, the absence of perceptions, this is peaceful, this is sublime, that domain. And it says, furthermore, because a noble disciple gone to the forest, gone to the root of a tree, or gone to an empty dwelling, reflects thus: this is empty of self, or of what belongs to self. For one who practices in this way, he is the one who often dwells like this. His mind develops clarity in this domain. So, because a noble disciple has gone to the forest, gone to the root of a tree, gone to an empty dwelling. So, a monk having gone and become physically secluded from everyone and everything, he reflects thus. And that's why it's necessary. He can't be with other people and say, this is empty of self, because the mind will say, well, okay, you are empty of self, but the external counterpart of you is not empty of self, or he might not be empty of self. So the basis for this reflection needs to be physical solitude, and it says, this is empty of self, or what belongs to self. So again, it's empty of the actually arisen present sense of self, or it's empty, and it's also empty of anything that belongs to and might belong to self. In other words, the self is not present, it's not implied neither through the presently arisen things that self can own, nor is it implied through the possibility of future arising of things that self can own. And the one who practices in this way, he is the one who dwells like this, and it will develop clarity in this domain. And that's why this is listed after these three ways of imperturbable and the nothingness, because it's the same practice, just in regard to the different, reflecting on different things. So with clarity, he enters upon the domain of nothingness, he inclines towards it with an understanding. On the breakup of the body after death, it is possible that the consciousness involved with this will reach the domain of nothingness. This is the second way suitable for the domain of nothingness. Furthermore, bhikkhus, a noble disciple, reflects thus: I am not in anything, anywhere, for anyone, and there isn't anything mine, anywhere, for anyone. For one who practices in this way, he's the one who often dwells like this, and so on. So this is now the extension. This is now the same reflection, just taking like more personal approach, or rather approach from more personal side, as opposed to sensuality, the inaccessibility of matter. The two are inseparable from each other, so you end up overcoming the sensuality to that. But if you approach it differently, or if you take it further, you would see that even once you have surmounted the sensual domain, you could see that what's there left, your experience as a whole, it's not in anything, anywhere, for anyone. As in, not just that you cannot own it, but anyone, whoever has a notion of self, cannot own it either, anywhere in the world. And there isn't anything mine, anywhere, for anyone, nor is there anything anyone's for me, for that matter. So this is the third way suitable for the nothingness. Further, noble disciple reflects thus: whatever sense desires here and now, whatever sense desires in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense desires here and now, whatever perceptions of sense desires in lives to come, whatever matter here and now, whatever matter in lives to come, whatever perceptions of matter here and now, whatever perceptions of matter in lives to come, whatever perceptions of imperturbability, and whatever perceptions of the domain of nothingness, all of that is perception. And we mentioned that in another talk, the absence of something is perceived as nothing. So nothingness is perceived. Whatever this ceases without a reminder, this is peaceful, that's sublime, which is the domain of neither perception nor no perception. So the same principle of development of the mind, the same principle of establishment, samadhi and clarity, just taken a notch further. So the one who practices in this way, he often dwells like this. With clarity, he enters upon the domain of neither perception nor perception. He inclines towards it with understanding. On the breakup of the body after death, it is possible that the consciousness involved with this will reach the domain of neither perception nor perception. After the Buddha finished this description of these establishments, the Venerable Ananda said this to the Blessed One: Here, Bhante, bhikkhu practices in this way. It might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. Whatever there is, whatever exists, that I am abandoning. In this way, he obtains indifference. Bhante, could he be fully extinguished, or might not be he fully extinguished? Ananda, in this case, some bhikkhus might be fully extinguished, and some might not be fully extinguished. What is the reason? What is the cause? Why some bhikkhus might not be fully extinguished, and some will be fully? Here, Ananda, bhikkhu prays in this way: it might not be, and it might not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. Whatever there is, whatever exists, that I am abandoning. In this way, he obtains indifference. He delights in this indifference, welcomes it, remains attached to it. For one delighting in this indifference, welcoming it, remaining attached to it, there is consciousness dependent on it, assumed by it. Ananda, bhikkhu with assumption is not fully extinguished. But where does that assuming bhikkhu assume? His assumption, Ananda, is on the level of the domain of neither perception nor perception. So surely this assuming bhikkhu assumes the best assumption then. Indeed, Ananda, this assuming bhikkhu assumes the best assumption. This, Ananda, is the best assumption, that is, the domain of neither perception nor non-perception. So if you remember in the beginning of this talk when we said the presence of matter is accidental, and you realize that this matter that's here, that I'm currently attracted to, say, some sense object, this matter that it's here, it could have not been. And that's what we mean when we say it's inaccessible to you. You can't even conceive where it came from. You are invisible to it. It's there, but it could have not been, and something that could have not been, you recognize it will not be. So all that is on the level of the presently arisen thing. And now you do the same for the possibilities to it that are also present on the peripheral level. So then it's not just, oh, this presently arisen matter that is accidental, it could have not arisen, it will not arise. But then you take it further, that which has arisen because of that accidentality, so to speak, cannot be mine. Which means any future things that might arise, that will arise, that could arise, well, they will for sure not arise for me. So setting your mind up upon such reflection, establishing it in it, means whatever arises, sensual or non-sensual, it's seen as accidental, it's seen as impermanent, it's seen as it cannot be owned, it's seen as anicca. So then having a reflection, it might not be, and it might not be for me, it will not be mine. Because if there is a sense of it might, in regard to your own sense of control and ownership, means it won't, means you are not the owner. If there is a possibility of things to not be yours, means you are not really in charge of deciding which things are yours. And that's how you realize that it might not be mine. It will not be mine. It cannot be mine. You could say it like that. And then it says, whatever there is, whatever exists, whatever can manifest, whatever I could own through my own ignorance, well, I'm abandoning like this, because I see it as impossible to own. And that's why he obtains upekkha as a result of it, a complete indifference. But if he doesn't see that indifference as also something that has arisen, a phenomenon that could have not been, pretty much, if he doesn't abandon that too, well, he will remain bound with his assumption of this is mine. But as the Buddha said, that assumption has basically abandoned the whole world now, abandoned the perception, and it's established upon abandoned the perception, abandoned the nothingness, and it's established upon the basis of neither perception nor perception. That's what it corresponds to. That way of thinking corresponds to the basis of neither perception nor perception. And it says this, Ananda, is the best type of assumption. It's the best type of upadana. So if anybody would hold on to the domain of neither perception nor perception, they would abandon pretty much everything, virtually everything. So very little left to do. And it says, here Ananda, bhikkhu practices in this way. It might not be, and it might not be mine. Thus it will not be mine. Whatever there is, whatever exists, that I am abandoning. In this way, he obtains indifference. He does not delight in it. He does not welcome it. He does not remain attached to it. For the one not delighting in indifference, not welcoming, not remaining attached to it, consciousness is not dependent on it, not assumed by it. And there are no assumptions, and bhikkhu without any assumption is the one who is fully extinguished. And then the Venerable Ananda summarizes, wonderful Bhante, marvelous. Truly it has been declared by the Blessed One, the means by which there is the crossing of the flood. But one Bhante, which is a noble liberation. Here Ananda, a noble disciple, reflects thus. Whatever sense desires here and now, whatever possibilities of sense desires in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense whatever possibilities of sense desires now and in lives to come, whatever perceptions of sense desire here and now, whatever perceptions of sense desires as a possibilities now and in lives to come, whatever matter here and now, whatever matter in the future, whatever perceptions of matter here and now, whatever perceptions of matter in lives to come, whatever perceptions of imperturbability, and whatever perceptions of the domain of nothingness, and whatever perceptions of the domain of neither perception nor perception, this is the personality, this is the extent of personality. Means this is the extent as far as the assumption can go, as far as upadana can reach. You surmount the extent, you have surmounted the basis of appropriation, the basis of upadana, the basis of personality. Just as he said up there, by surmounting the central domain, you have surmounted the domain upon which greed, ill will, delusion manifest as a basis. So you don't stop your greed, aversion, delusion voluntarily. You remove its necessary basis. So in the same sense, you can't say, oh, I'm not a person, I'll decide to be not a person, and I'll decide to extinguish the slightest traces of my personality. You can't do that, but what you can do is surmount the basis of personality, not delight in it, not assume it, see it as accidentally arisen, impermanent, impossible to own, and that will be the cessation of personality. And it says, this is the deathless, this is the liberation of the mind without assumptions. Thus, Ananda, the way suitable for the imperturbable has been taught by me. The way suitable for the domain of nothingness has been taught. The way suitable for the domain of neither perception nor perception has been taught, by the means of which there is the crossing of the flood, noble liberation has been taught. Ananda, whatever should be done by the teacher for the welfare of the disciples, compassionate out of compassion, this has been done by me for you. These Ananda are roots of trees, these are empty dwellings. Meditate Ananda, do not be negligent, do not be the one who regrets later. This is our instruction to you. So that was Majjhima 106.